All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for Global HR Optimization. Be a high performer. I am super excited to be here with Matt Slazak, Senior HCM Consultant. Let's get started.
All right. What we're really going to be talking about today is really gearing toward the people who have been on GHR for a while. You might have gone live 5 years ago, you might have gone live just recently, but we want to talk about how do we get the most out of this product. We've got it up there, and the question now is kind of now what? What are we supposed to do? How can we really make the system sing? It can do a lot of things. We already know what we implemented, but what more can we do? How can we extract even more value out of it? If you are not familiar with the recent additions and the recent modules that have been added or improvements that have been made, it's really a question of, what more can we do with it? How much more can we get out of it? So let's start to go into some of the things that we've seen, some tips and tricks that we've seen in terms of getting more out of it. So let's dive right into it and talk about some of the things that people don't think of. When we first go live with a lot of these projects, we're talking about, some of the pure hardcore actions that we have to do. We really need to dive into it. We need to get transactions processed. It's all about getting payroll to run. We need to make sure that people are transferred or promoted or hired the way they need to, but we don't think about the things that could help us along the way. So one of the first things that we do is we'll start to talk about different supervisor types or different supervisor levels. Are we really capturing who our leaders are in our organization? And the reason why we might want to ask a question like that and really evaluate this is, can we start to reroute some of our actions based on who these people are? So when we first go live, we're concerned about getting that supervisor structure into the system. We're used to our S3 supervisors, and we get them in and we get them functional in GHR. Our first pass on that really is manager space. Can managers see who they're supposed to see? Can they see all their employees? Can we see what we need them to see? But the question then becomes, all right, we might have something like a promotion or a transfer. If we have somebody like the CEO putting in a transaction, does it necessarily have to route for an approval? Or can we actually just say, you know what, because of who this person is, that can automatically be approved? And one of the best ways for us to do that is to look at our supervisor types and look at those levels. If we start to attach those onto all of our supervisor codes, we can start to reroute these things differently. Again, if it's somebody in the C-suite, we don't have to worry about it. We can just have them go right into that immediate approve. It does not have to go to HR administrator, for example, because we, in theory, know that this person should know what they're talking about and can actually push that right through. So that's something to think about that. Another end of that is think about your hierarchy, okay? Is there something that we can do better to show what our supervisor structure really looks like? Through the use of these levels, we can start to see, all right, well, here is where our top level is. If somebody wants to produce something like a supervisor chart, can we see that very quickly and see what level of manager this person is? Think about that and think about whether or not our hierarchy is really being reflected as we go through our different supervisors. So one of the best ways to do that, think about those supervisor levels. Pretty basic information, but great for us to capture. Another thing along those same lines is think about our jobs and positions. Again, when we go into a GHR project, we're really all about the position. Let's get those positions in. Let's make sure that we're getting that hierarchy of jobs and positions, get them built out. Make sure they're in the system, make sure they're exactly how we need to drive our GHR benefits or our talent acquisition pieces. We want to be able to see all of that. So we want to make sure that we get our jobs, our levels, families, categories, subcategories, let's get those in, especially if we did not think about those from the beginning. Again, when we brought them into GHR from S3, we might not have had some of these fields available. But something like a category or a subcategory, especially when we move to something like talent acquisition, super important. People can start to search on those and filter down results and look for jobs based on that information. If we don't have that built out in there, maybe it's a good time for us to start to really make the system grab that information and make it work better for us. The other thing that we can do is think about, even if we have exhausted our job levels and our families, categories and subcategories, we can always add more job country attributes. We're very used to, in the GHR world, going in and setting up something like our EEO information or mapping things back to the job category on the S3 side. But there's no restriction on how many job country attributes you can add. So even if you have exhausted those other categories, we can always add more job country attributes. Start to capture information that you've never even thought about for your jobs and positions. You've got them available, might as well use them. Recently had a client, I think they're up to about a dozen different job country attributes. You don't have to map them anywhere, but they're really for something like producing a report. If we want to be able to see everything in a specific category that's not already captured, we added a new job country attribute and built out a report based on that. It's always an option for you. Think about it and see if that is useful for you. No restrictions on it. Another thing to think about right up front is configurations and personalizations. If you've seen our past webinars, you know that I will talk about configurations and personalizations for weeks. But now that we're in GHR and we're live, we can go beyond the pure functional and the pure tactical and start to think about people like our super users, the people who are actually boots on the ground doing work all the time. And they might have some very specific needs. So we may have configured an action, for example, to restrict managers or administrators to do only certain things or stay within certain parameters. For example, let's say that a change pay rate could go in, but we only wanted to allow somebody to submit a transaction that was within 2% of the person's normal pay rate. But we need a super user to be able to go past that. So rather than have to have that be caught by the HR administrator or let the compensation analyst know that there's something else that has to happen with it, we can always take a personalization and apply it specifically to those users and allow them to go past that little restriction. As long as we don't have it hard-coded on the action, we can always do that through personalization and let that go through. So it's something to think about on that. Another way to think about that is with these personalizations and configurations, think about our list views and our punch lists. We can really start to tailor the system to show the information that a user needs at that time. If we know that there's a situation where a user is going in and having to drill into a record to determine one more piece of information, let's allow them to personalize it. Or even if it's something more widespread, let's configure that form or that list to show that information to them up front. There's no reason why we can't revisit our personalizations and configurations to allow a little bit more information to be displayed on there. Something we can also do with those personalizations is if we need to expand it out a little bit and allow somebody to have a little bit more security and maybe take another action based on that list, we can always do that. Again, you've got the tools available, they're out of the box, and it's just a matter of configuring or personalizing them to allow a little bit more access inside there. So always challenge yourself with those personalizations and configurations. You went live with them, but there's no reason why you can't expand them out a little bit further. As I've gone through a lot of these projects, again, those personalizations become absolutely vital. We want to be able to give people the information that they need when they need it and allow the work to be performed where and when it needs to be done. If we've got an HR administrator who's still digging for information, let's look at that personalization or configuration and give them more information. Allow them to see that. The other piece of that is really think about those users and what they need to do at that time. So if we want to create something like a work list, if you're an Enrich client, it's very easy for us to bring up a list view, personalize it, and drag it onto the canvas. And there we have a quick punch list. Meet these parameters, there's the information for us, and we can start to do transactions based on that. But think about it a little bit further. Allow that to be a report, allow it to be personalized, and let those administrators see that on a daily basis. So they can always go back through, change it up a little bit, and see all of their information right up front. So never, ever stop thinking about those personalizations and configurations. They're there, might as well configure them and make them a little bit more powerful for everybody in your organization. Another thing to think about kind of off of that is think about other actions and other interfaces that have to happen. So if you had a situation where you had a transaction where they had to do one more thing, ask another question inside there, why not do something to give them more information on that action? Or if it's not enough on that action itself, why not create an entirely new action to do that? We see that a lot of times with something like a change relationship to organization. If we haven't configured that form, but we need to do something extra to get in something like an FTE, again, not out of the box, it's not in there right away, but let's add that in. Or maybe if we want to allow change relationship to organization to stay the way it is, we can always create a new action that is just for FTE. So change relationship to organization with FTE change. So maybe they're going from an employee to a contractor or vice versa. Everything else is staying the same. Why not give a custom action just for that? We also see that a lot in the world of when we do have multiple different relationships to organization, and we need to do something like a hire of a contractor or a volunteer. We want GHR to be the system of record. We want it to collect all the people who are in our organization. Our best way for us to do that, and we want to get that information out to those people, to those users, if we've got somebody in volunteer services or somebody who's a contract manager, we want them to be able to enter in their contractors or their volunteers, get that information in there, and maybe we give them a custom action. So instead of doing a full-fledged hire action with tons of fields that are not really relevant to those types of employees, why not give them a custom action that just has 4 or 5 fields that they really need, enter in the contractor record, basic information, and it's right there for them. They don't have to worry about addresses or anything else. Configure that action, give them that extra action so you don't have to manage it yourself. Again, single point of truth at that point. That person who was a volunteer, you never know, we might end up bringing them in as a regular hire later on. Great way for us to capture that. Think about also your interfaces. Now we're very used to our HR export table, okay? The ones that are going from GHR and sending that information back to S3. But let's be honest, the LT11 is somewhat limited. Obviously, we can go through and put things like user fields on there, but let's just say we need to send something else over. And it's not on your LT11 screen and we can't push it over. So what do we do in that situation? A lot of times, what we've seen folks do is they'll go through and do the transaction in GHR, and then they have to remember to go back to S3 and add something in like a badge number or a mailbox number. Not really mapped fields all the time. So what do? Think about doing some sort of custom process flow or a custom action to push that information from GHR to S3. You've got the ability in IPA to do this. You just have to have that AGS call ready and be able to push that over. You can do that. You also have the ability to look at your records that are in GHR, and they all have those update stamps. So we can focus that very narrowly and say, show me anything that has changed today, and send that specific piece of information over for that changed record over to the S3 side. You've got that ability. It's in the system with the tools you've got. You just have to do a little bit of configuration and IPA work and get that information to send over. Beyond that, if you already have all the information going to S3 that you need, but let's just say that we have something like a time collection system, or we've got our learning management system and it's not one of the Infor delivered ones. What do we do there? Well, we can still send that data over in a lot of ways. Most systems will allow you to do something like import a CSV of information. So we can always create that information, build that out in an IPA, have that file be produced, and have it be ready to be accepted by that other system. There's usually a lot of ways where we can push information over, even if it's not an out-of-the-box supported interface. Think about those things and what other manual processes you might have. Again, think about all these things post-implementation. What's still broken? What do you still need to do? You know, what other systems do you have to push information over to? And those are great areas for you to really optimize your GHR setup. Another thing to think about, I talked a little bit about our list views and things that we can do, but think about reporting. A lot of times people will come into a GHR project and have only a sketchy view of what information do senior leaders need or managers. What do they need to see? And they might have very specific needs. They might also have something that's very generic. So a manager might just want to know who their people are, a fundamental question that's always out there. We've solved a lot of that through manager space, but we need something more than that still. So think about your senior leaders, and maybe they need to see a wider view of specific jobs or positions. Start to build those reports out. GHR has capabilities built within it to distribute these reports just through the core product itself. So you can start to build those reports, make them public, or push them out to a specific actor group. So again, if we're thinking about our manager levels, and if we've added some of those in, maybe we produce a report that is to a specific manager level. Make that published, create that report and publish it specifically to that actor group based on that manager level. So only somebody in a director level or above can start to see this. Build those reports out, let Landmark Security take over at that point. There's no reason to have to go and create a crystal report that's Enterprise Edition and distribute it that way. Create that report in GHR, make it public, publish it to that actor group, and that information is there and available for them right within the system. No exporting, nothing else needed. Obviously, if they want to export it, they'll be able to within the system itself, but you've already pushed that out to them. Then also think about that next level. Think about your dashboards. Think about something like Burst. If you haven't already looked at the Burst product that's out there, a lot of robust capabilities built into that. But also, when we look at something like the HCM analytics that they've started to push out, there's some nice stuff in there, but think beyond the delivered. We've done a lot of work already where we're starting to build brand new Burst dashboards and Burst reports so we can get even a deeper level of information straight from Burst. Again, Burst is great at making a very nice presentation of your data, nice visualizations within there. But think about that information that people actually need. And more importantly, actionable information that people can use. So the need and the use are not always the same thing. So think about that and go to that deeper level. What more can we give people to help them out in their daily lives? If you've been live on GHR for a long time, I'm sure that you're familiar with your Async overview. But if you're not, and you're not looking at it frequently, it is something worth looking into. Look at your Async records, okay? Dig into your Async failures. If you're seeing things that are failing on a consistent basis, it's really time to dive deeper into that and see what's actually happening. So look at your failures. Look at anything that's maybe showing up in the default queue. Are we consistently seeing certain things blowing up? Look at those failures, see how we can figure them out. If you also are on GHR for a long time, you might have seen the dreaded green audit log line. So that line of future transaction or a transaction that has already occurred, but it's in green on the audit log and it never becomes a current record. So what do we do there? Dive into your async queue. You're going to see something sitting there in your effective dated queue. It's probably something where if you just requeue that, it's going to be able to process and get that information updated. Check out your async queue. Cannot stress it enough. Dig into those as much as you can. We usually recommend with a new implementation, check it at least once a day and see what's going on with it. If async fails, it's the straw that stirs the drink. Nothing else is going to work if async is stuck. So check those out. You definitely want to look for those. You want to see those hung records that are sitting out there. Make sure that we get those processing, because nothing worse than going live with a system or running a system and people are not seeing transactions posting. Chances are it's an async problem. Check them out, dig into them, get them requeued. Something else that you're going to see along with that async record is look at your queue management. If you're seeing things consistently failing or getting hung in async, Start to see if there's maybe other queues that you can build out. Now, this is something in more recent versions where you can really effectively build those queues a lot easier than you used to be able to do. But if we need to see things, if we need to increase the processing on certain queues, build those queues out, increase the numbers of transactions running at the same time, and really let those flow the way we need to. No reason for everything to be sitting in the default queue. Create new queues, parse them out, let them all run simultaneously. You're going to have a much better experience with that. Another thing that you need to think about if you've been live on GHR for a long time is what other modules are out there? What else can we use? So think about back in the beginning of GHR, and it was really GHR and talent acquisition. And then slowly but surely, they started adding more and more to it. So we had compensation and succession and goals, all these things that started to be added into the product. If you're very familiar with GHR and you've been running it for a long time, you might not have seen recent versions of talent acquisition where they've made major changes in the past few years. Same thing with performance management, for example. They're adding more to that all the time. So check out those new modules that are available. Even if they're not major modules that you'd be looking for, you can always look at something like employee relations or health and safety. These are recent additions within the past few years, and some people might not even know about them. You might have seen a widget added onto your dashboard, but what more can it do for us? Can we kill off one of these other saddlebag systems just by implementing one of these modules, or start to bring in some of these other pieces of information? You've got a large system sitting out there. We might as well try to consolidate as much as we can. So explore those other modules. Even if you just inquire on them, look through Infor's homepage, find out what else is out there. You might find some nice stuff. I mentioned a couple minutes ago something like your effective dated queue. Okay, so those transactions where we said we had a future effective date sitting out there on them. But something I always encourage people to do is go back through and do an effective dated queue review. So to do this, go in and type on your search bar, effective dated group. You're going to see very quickly anytime somebody has done a future dated transaction and what our real lag times are on those. So I might create a transaction and say it's effective 2 weeks from now, and it's going to be showing up in that effective dated queue. Even after it's processed, it's sitting there. So we can start to see how well we've actually been using our effective dates. As we know, effective dates are king within the system. So we can start to see how well we've actually been able to use those. The other thing that we can start to see on that is we can do a quick review and see if somebody has put in a transaction that is just completely outlandish. Think about people who are going through their daily lives, a generalist who is just trying to process everything possible. They're doing all of this at the same time. They're going as fast as they can to get all these things in, and they might key in something that's effective 12/20/2091. That's so far been my favorite one, where it's been, someday we're going to hire this person in about 90 years. Check that out. You're going to be able to see that. Just search by the effective date that's sitting out there and see if you've got something that's outlandish and really, we probably should hire that person sometime before 2091 because they seem like they're pretty good. So you can always go back in, find that transaction, and you can also, in the effective dated queue, go through and change the effective date on that, so we can actually make that person live instead of having to wait, 70, 90 years, whatever it is. So think about that. Check those queues out. You might have some things hanging out there which you might not realize. Another thing to think about, work unit maintenance. If you've been live on GHR for a long time, you literally have thousands of work units sitting out there. Everything from simple hire or transfer transactions, change pay rates, things like that. But you've also got all of your interfaces. So your HR exports to employees and jobs and positions, they're all sitting out there. They've all got information, but if you've got thousands of transactions sitting out there, do you really need all of that content? We can start to shrink down the size of our database at that point. Where we really see that a lot of times is with our PFI activity variables. Every time a transaction is going through and using process flow, you're going to see that it's saving off those records for all of the variables that are changing. If you're using IPA to do something like produce batch files, you will have thousands of PFI activity variables for every time one of those values changes. Went to a client at one point who was on-prem, and they had about 8 gigs of data just sitting in PFI activity variables from about 5 years of transactions. Admittedly, they were running large batch transactions frequently, so they had a lot of data sitting out there, and they were always adding more blades to their server because they didn't clear these out. Check those out. It's very simple for you to go into your work units and delete selected activities and variables. Think about scheduling that even. Say that if it's more than 6 months old, do I care about the work unit data on it? You can still keep the shell of the record, but we might not need all of the detail living behind it. By that point, you probably have already processed the transaction. It's already been accepted. The person's been working in that new position for months by now. But do we really need all the information about when the variables changed within the process flow? Chances are no, but if we keep that shell of just who initiated the transaction, what the effective dates were, what the reason codes are, we don't necessarily need all those PFI activity variables. So check that out, see if you can do some maintenance to kind of clear that out. No reason to keep it around if it's an old accepted transaction. So those are some of the basic ways for you to really optimize your GHR build. Think about pushing the boundaries all the time on this. There's no reason why we can't add more and build more out in the system. You just have to dig a little bit deeper on it.